Joshua Black, a 35-year-old man, woke up that morning with a sense of accomplishment. As the chief operating officer of Quantum Tech, one of Los Angeles' most promising tech companies, he was used to starting his days with meetings, phone calls, and strategic decisions. But that morning, after wrapping up an important meeting earlier than expected, he felt he deserved a moment to himself. The sky was clear, and the sun shone brightly, creating a stark contrast with the soft shadows cast by the palm trees lining the streets of Beverly Hills. The neighborhood, known for its luxurious mansions and quiet streets, offered a welcome break from the city's frenetic pace. Joshua decided that a walk around there would be a great way to clear his mind before returning to the office. Dressed in a pristine navy suit, an Egyptian cotton white shirt, and Italian shoes, Joshua walked with the confidence of someone who knew he had worked hard for everything he had. His Rolex watch, a gift to himself after closing a major deal the previous year, gleamed under the sunlight. He seemed to belong to that scene of wealth and success, but deep down, he knew this was only part of the story. As he walked, Joshua reflected on his journey. He had been born and raised in a poor neighborhood of Chicago, raised by his mother, a determined woman who always believed that education would be the path to a better future. He faced many challenges, including prejudice and financial difficulties, but he never let them defeat him. He studied hard, earned a scholarship to a prestigious university, and eventually stood out in the competitive world of technology. The distant sound of an engine brought Joshua back to the present. He noticed a police car slowly approaching, its occupants watching him with interest. Joshua had felt this way before. The persistent gaze, the unfounded suspicion, the anticipation of a confrontation. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but his body began to prepare for what he knew might happen. The car stopped beside him, and two officers got out. The first was a white man in his 50s, with a stern expression and cold eyes. The second, a younger Latina woman, seemed slightly more hesitant, but equally alert. "Sir, can you stop for a moment?" said the older officer, whose name tag identified him as Sergeant Matthews. Joshua, keeping his exterior calm, stopped and looked directly at the sergeant. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Matthews stepped forward, narrowing his eyes. "We got a report of someone matching your description acting suspiciously in this area. We'd like to see your ID." Joshua felt the anger rising, but knew he needed to stay in control. He had been in situations like this before and knew that any sign of resistance could be used against him. With deliberately slow movements, he took out his wallet and pulled out his ID and business card. "Here it is," Joshua said, handing the documents to the sergeant. "My name is Joshua Black. I'm the chief operating officer at Quantum Tech." The Latina officer, whose name was Ramirez, took the documents and examined them. She looked slightly uncomfortable, as if she knew something was wrong but didn't dare to question her superior. "Joshua Black," she read aloud. "Chief Operating Officer, huh?" Joshua kept his gaze fixed on Matthews, who was still staring at him with a mix of suspicion and something else, something Joshua recognized as contempt. "Don't you think it's strange for a man like you to be walking around here, Black?" Matthews asked, emphasizing the last name in a way that turned a simple formality into a personal attack. Joshua clenched his jaw, controlling his anger. He knew what Matthews meant by "a man like you," but he refused to give the officer the satisfaction of a reaction. "I don't see anything strange about it, officer," Joshua responded, keeping his voice steady. "I'm just taking a walk. I didn't know that was against the law." Ramirez handed the documents back to Joshua, but Matthews didn't seem satisfied. He stepped closer, invading Joshua's personal space. "We'll be keeping an eye on you, Black," he finally said, his voice loaded with insinuations. "We don't want any trouble around here." Joshua slowly put his wallet away, never taking his eyes off Matthews. "You can rest assured, officer. I'm the last person who wants to cause any trouble," he said with a calmness that belied the storm of emotions raging inside him. The officers returned to their car and drove off, but Joshua knew the incident would remain etched in his memory for a long time. He continued his walk, but the pleasure of the moment had dissipated, replaced by a bitter reminder that despite all his success, there was still a part of the world that only saw him for the color of his skin. Joshua decided he wouldn't let this pass. He knew he needed to do something not just for himself, but for everyone who had gone through similar situations. That encounter had awakened him to an uncomfortable truth. Racism was still alive and well, even in places where it was least expected. As he returned to the office, Joshua was already beginning to plan his next steps. He knew he was about to embark on a difficult battle, but his determination had never been stronger. After the encounter with the police, Joshua Black returned to his office at Quantum Tech, but the serenity he had felt that morning was now a thing of the past. As he entered the modern building, with its gleaming glass walls and the company logo shining at the entrance, he felt a heaviness in his chest. It wasn't the first time he had faced prejudice, but each new episode left a deeper mark. Joshua crossed the lobby, nodding at the receptionist. She, a light-skinned young woman with an easy smile, always greeted him enthusiastically. Today, however, he only responded with a slight nod. He was lost in thought when he reached his office, a spacious room with a stunning view of Los Angeles. Joshua sank into his leather chair. His eyes focused on the distant buildings, but his mind was far away. He picked up the phone and called his assistant, Paul, a brilliant young man who had been on his team for 3 years. "Paul, can you come here for a minute?" Joshua asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Within a few minutes, Paul entered the room, carrying a tablet and with his usual attentive expression. He immediately noticed that something was wrong. "Is everything okay, Joshua?" Paul asked, frowning as he saw his boss with such a serious expression. Joshua sighed, gesturing for Paul to sit down. "I had an unpleasant encounter this morning," he began, looking at Paul. "I was stopped by 2 police officers while I was walking in Beverly Hills." "Stopped? Why?" Paul seemed incredulous. He knew Joshua well, knew his impeccable character and the importance of his position. The idea that he could be suspected of anything seemed absurd. "They said I was acting suspiciously, but we know what that really means." Joshua looked at Paul with a tired and frustrated expression. "I was stopped because I'm a black man walking in a rich neighborhood." Paul opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it again, unsure of what to say. He knew Joshua's story, knew the challenges he had overcome to get where he was, but this was the first time he had seen the impact of racism so up close. "They asked for my ID, made insinuating remarks. It was humiliating," Joshua continued, his voice growing firmer as he relived the encounter. "And the worst part is that I knew any reaction from me could be interpreted as aggressive. So, I stood there, politely answering while they treated me like a criminal." "This is unacceptable," Paul said, his voice tinged with anger. "We have to do something about this. Maybe go public with what happened. Get the press involved." Joshua raised his hand, stopping Paul. "Calm down, Paul. I know we need to do something, but I need to think about how to do it. I don't want this situation to turn into a meaningless media spectacle. We need to act strategically." Paul nodded, still with an expression of indignation. "What do you plan to do?" "First, I'm going to investigate who these officers are," Joshua said with determination. "I want to know if there are other cases where they acted the same way. This might not be just an isolated incident." "Understood. I'll get our legal team in touch with a private investigator. We'll find out everything we can about these guys," Paul replied, already noting down instructions on his tablet. Joshua nodded, grateful. "Thanks, Paul. And please, keep this confidential for now. I don't want this story getting out before we have all the information." "Of course, Joshua. I'm with you on this," Paul assured, standing up. "And if you need anything else, I'm here." When Paul left, Joshua leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. He knew the road ahead would be tough, but he also knew he couldn't simply ignore what had happened. Every fiber of his being pushed him to seek justice, not just for himself, but for all those who had faced the same situation and had no voice to defend themselves. Later that day, Joshua received a call from an unknown number. He hesitated for a second before answering. "Mr. Black?" the voice on the other end of the line asked, with cold formality. "Yes, who's speaking?" Joshua responded, feeling a twinge of distrust. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm a civil rights attorney. I heard about the incident you experienced this morning. Believe me, this isn't the first time I've heard stories like yours." Joshua frowned. "How did you find out about this?" Los Angeles is a big city, but the circle of people who matter is smaller than. It seems, Marcus replied with a slight laugh. And, to be honest, I have a network of contacts that keeps me informed about incidents like this. I heard your name and decided I needed to reach out. Joshua was silent for a moment, pondering. What do you want? I want to help, Mr. Black. Cases like yours are more common than they should be, and my mission is to expose these injustices. If you're willing, we can work together to ensure those officers face the consequences of their actions. Joshua considered the offer. He wasn't used to trusting strangers, especially when it came to something so sensitive. But there was something in Marcus's voice, a conviction that resonated with Joshua's own outrage. Let's talk more about this, Joshua finally said. I want to do this the right way. Excellent, Marcus responded, his voice full of seriousness. I'll do whatever it takes to ensure justice is served. I'll schedule a meeting with you and your lawyer if you have one, and we can discuss the best strategy. I'll arrange that, Joshua said, ending the call. Joshua hung up the phone and took a deep breath. The decision was made. He would not let this incident be just another footnote in an already long history of injustices. He would fight, and he would do it with all the strength and resources he had at his disposal. In the days that followed, Joshua couldn't stop thinking about the incident with the police. Although he wanted to believe it had been an isolated case, part of him knew it was a symptom of something much larger and deeper. He began to recall other moments in his life when he had been treated as less than he was because of the color of his skin. When he was 12 years old, Joshua was unjustly accused of stealing from a convenience store in his neighborhood. The real thief was never found, but the experience marked him forever. During his teenage years, he constantly found himself having to prove his worth, not just because he was black, but also because he refused to fit into stereotypes. Now, years later, as a successful adult, he realized that despite everything he had achieved, some things would never change. Society still viewed him with suspicion, and this was something he could no longer ignore. With these painful memories resurfacing, Joshua decided it was time to act. He began investigating other cases of police racism in the area and found a disturbing pattern. There were dozens of reports similar to his, but most of the victims were ordinary people without the power or resources to defend themselves. But Joshua was not like the others. He had the position, the contacts, and most importantly, the determination to do something about it. Determined to expose the truth, he began planning his next steps, unaware that he was about to set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. Determined to expose the injustice he had suffered and to reveal the prejudiced treatment that many others faced, Joshua began to develop a plan. He knew he needed to act cautiously, as exposing racist practices within the system could put his life and career at risk. Even so, Joshua was determined to move forward. He started by gathering information on similar cases. Through his connections in the black community of Los Angeles, Joshua was able to contact several victims of police abuse. Their stories were shocking and painful, but each one reinforced his determination. Joshua knew he needed solid evidence to make his complaint carry weight. So, he hired a private investigator to dig deeper into the background of the officers who had approached him, especially Sergeant Matthews. What he discovered was disturbing. Matthews had a long list of complaints for misconduct, many of them involving black men who were unjustly stopped and questioned. Armed with this information, Joshua reached out to civil rights attorney Marcus Thompson. Marcus was known for not being afraid to take on the system, and Joshua knew he was the right person to help him move his case forward. "You're playing a dangerous game, Joshua," Marcus warned after hearing the whole story. "But if we're in this together, we'll see it through to the end. This could not only clear your name, but also pave the way for other victims of injustice." Joshua knew his decision to move forward with the case wouldn't be well received, and he was right. A few days after initiating legal action against the police department, he began to notice that he was being followed. Cars were parked outside his house, and he received anonymous calls at all hours of the day. However, this only served to increase his determination. As Joshua and Marcus prepared the case, the media began to take notice of the story. Gradually, journalists started asking questions about police behavior in wealthy neighborhoods and the pattern of stops that followed the same line as what Joshua had experienced. The pressure mounted when Marcus managed to get a story published in a major newspaper. The report detailed the allegations against Sergeant Matthews and included testimonies from several victims. The public was in an uproar, and the reputation of the local police began to be questioned. The police department's response was swift and fierce. In a press conference, the police chief vehemently denied all the accusations, stating that the officers involved were exemplary professionals and that the stops described by Joshua and others were standard procedures to ensure community safety. However, Joshua knew the truth was on his side. He and Marcus continued to gather evidence and prepare their case. Meanwhile, Joshua began receiving support from various civil rights organizations and community leaders, who saw in his fight an opportunity to expose a problem that had long been ignored. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was packed with journalists, activists, and onlookers eager to witness the outcome of the case. Joshua was nervous, but also confident. He knew this was a crucial moment, not just for him, but for everyone who had suffered injustice. Marcus delivered a brilliant presentation, exposing the evidence of systemic racism within the police department and highlighting the patterns of behavior that had led to Joshua's unjust stop. He brought up Matthews' misconduct records and called several witnesses to give powerful testimonies about their own experiences. The defense tried to discredit Joshua, insinuating that he was exaggerating and that his story was just an attempt to gain notoriety. But Joshua stood firm. In his testimony, he spoke about what it meant to be a black man in a society that still couldn't see beyond the color of his skin. As the trial unfolded, Marcus received an anonymous tip about a video recording that could change everything. The recording, made by a security camera in one of the neighborhood houses, clearly showed the officer's approach to Joshua. More importantly, it captured a conversation between Matthews and Ramirez before they exited the car. In the recording, Matthews could be heard saying, "Look at this guy. I bet he doesn't belong in this neighborhood. Let's show him that this isn't his place." This evidence was devastating. Marcus presented the video in court, and the impact was immediate. The public was shocked, and the defense was caught off guard. The recording proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the stop of Joshua was not based on any legitimate suspicion, but rather on racial prejudice. With the new evidence, the trial quickly moved toward a conclusion. The jury deliberated for only a short time before delivering a verdict in Joshua's favor. He had won, and the police department was ordered to pay substantial damages, in addition to implementing changes in their procedures. Although Joshua had won the legal battle, he knew the fight against racism was far from over. The case had attracted national attention, and he found himself in a new leadership role, being called upon to speak at conferences and participate in debates on racism and social justice. However, the victory also brought unexpected consequences. Joshua began receiving threats from racist groups, and his personal life was severely affected. He had to move houses and hire security to ensure his safety. A few weeks after the trial ended, Joshua received an unexpected visit. It was Officer Ramirez, Matthew's partner. She seemed nervous and hesitant, but finally revealed that there was something she needed to confess. Ramirez told Joshua that it wasn't Matthews who made the initial report against him. The anonymous call that led to the stop had been made by someone much closer than he had imagined. Ramirez revealed that the real tipster was none other than Henry Collins, the vice president of the company where Joshua worked. Henry had always been envious of Joshua, and upon realizing that Joshua was in a position to be promoted to CEO, he decided to use a subtle and racist approach to discredit him. He knew that a police stop in a wealthy neighborhood could create an embarrassing situation that could damage Joshua's reputation, both personally and professionally. This revelation was a devastating blow. Joshua realized that even though he had won in court, he was surrounded by hidden enemies. The real enemy wasn't just police prejudice, but also those who, out of envy or fear, were willing to destroy everything he had achieved. With this new information, Joshua had to make a difficult decision. He confronted Henry with the truth, leading to the immediate dismissal of the vice president and an internal investigation at the company. But Joshua's trust in his work environment had been irreparably shaken. Joshua had triumphed against great odds, but he paid a high price. He not only exposed racial injustice, but also the betrayals that occurred beneath the surface of his professional life. However, Joshua did not let these revelations destroy him. Instead, he used his experience to continue fighting for justice, becoming an unwavering advocate for social change and an example of resilience. He knew that the fight against racism and injustice was a marathon, not a sprint. Every small victory was a step toward a more just and equal society. Joshua was ready to continue this fight, knowing that despite personal defeats, he was creating a legacy that could inspire future generations.